Well, I would like to just show you where I come from. This is Aarhus University Hospital. And this is where I was born many years ago. And this is where I went to school. And this is where I went to medical school. And this is where I worked as a physician. I'm still working there. This is a home for the elderly, where I expect to stay. And at the very end, this is a church. So you can get everything in Aarhus at my place. Unfortunately, this is the new location for the super hospital that is being built. So it's basically presently a hole in the ground. This is where I live, very nicely, close to the beach. And this is where the new department will be. And it's a bicycle ride and it's uphill all the way, so it's not too good for me. Anyhow, this is how I would like to structure the speak. This is just to remind ourselves about the entire field of pituitary endocrinology. Usually it has to do with a pituitary tumor. This is the typical disease. And one of the problems could be hormonal hypersecretion. And it may also involve pressure symptoms, which may induce hypopituitarism. And it also may induce compression of the optic chiasm. And we can have a combination of all these symptoms in the same patient. What we should focus on here is mainly growth hormone hypersecretion. And this is just to remind you that acromegaly is a very rare disease. It's very interesting, but it's also very rare as compared to the much more prevalent diseases within endocrinology, such as osteoporosis and type 2 diabetes. But acromegaly is so much more interesting, in my opinion at least. When we do a diagnosis of acromegaly, like many other endocrine diseases, we actually take advantage of the fact of this feedback mechanism between hormonal secretion and biological effect. And this is a very simple illustration that we have an endocrine cell that produces a hormone that is secreted in the circulation, and we can measure that. And it elicits a biological effect, which could be another hormone or metabolites, which feedback inhibits the endocrine secreting self. And this system always strives for an equilibrium. This is a little slightly more complicated feedback loop where we have an hypothalamic area, and we have a pituitary gland, and we have also peripheral glands, could be the gonads or the thyroid glands, that eventually secretes hormones and elicits biological effects. And you can have feedback inhibition at each single level. So this is how it looks in relation to growth hormone, that growth hormone releasing hormones stimulates the pituitary secretion of growth hormone, which in turn stimulates the hepatic and also peripheral production of IGF-1, which is circulating, and it also stimulates other signals. And these signals, for instance, circulating IGF-1 feedback inhibits the system, and we have also other metabolites such as free fatty acids and glucose that also suppresses the secretion ultimately of growth hormone, so we have this equilibrium. And of particular note, we can measure these compounds in the circulation, and it could be also a part of the diagnostic workup. So what we see when we have a growth hormone secreting adenoma is that this feedback system is more or less abrogated. We have ongoing 24-hour secretion of growth hormone that is not responsive to feedback. So we have elevated levels of growth hormone, we have elevated levels of serum IGF-1, and we have elevated levels of free fatty acids and also glucose. And this is actually part of the diagnosis of acromegaly. We do also have, of course, as you know, symptoms and signs that the patients present with, which are also, of course, very important, but they are not always sufficient, as you know, of course. This is a summary of the most prevalent symptoms of acromegaly and signs. I will not go over each item, but of course the growth phenomena of the bones is of course very important. Sweating, headache, and sleep apnea, this should be more prevalent in my opinion, are also very common symptoms. And of course these symptoms, when they present in classic form together with a typical phenotype, I mean, we are very close to making the diagnosis. And if you have the prototypical patient, it's also very obvious, and there is little doubt, in my opinion, that this subject has indeed acromegaly. We have frontal boson, we have prognatism, we have all the characteristic features, and I think this patient the onset of disease was probably when he was still had not finished longitudinal growth, because it's also a very tall person. And an additional important feature that you're also aware of is this pre-diagnostic phase, which is quite typical in most patients. It can be calculated that there is a delay in the onset of the diagnosis, which is something like 6 to 10 years, which I think is also applies to this particular gentleman. We can of course speculate when the disease actually started, but it's probably somewhere around here. This is another typical patient, somewhat older and also presenting with some photographs. And again, the features at the time of diagnosis are quite prominent, and there's little doubt about the diagnosis. This is another typical patient, and he's actually a giant, and he has an AIP mutation. We cannot discuss that today, but that's a very interesting genetic cause of acromegaly. And again, it's a very classic phenotype. And this is my nurse that I collaborate with, Lisbeth. Again, another very typical phenotype. These are brothers, and this is a younger brother, and he has acromegaly. But this now is my point, is that occasionally the phenotype is much more subtle, and then you really need additional diagnostic and stringent criteria. And these are just 5 examples of patients that, in my opinion, were not prototypical in terms of acromegalic features, but eventually was diagnosed with the disease. So it is important that you have biochemical criteria, of course. Another tricky feature is this patient who initially presented with a prolactinoma, and she had menstrual irregularities and infertility in her younger age, and eventually, but she also had undiagnosed acromegaly, which eventually was disclosed many years after. So, I think this audience, we all appreciate this, that approximately 1/3 of the patient with acromegaly also co-secrete prolactin. So that's, of course, something that we should also be aware of, and which may have diagnostic implications. So how do we make the biochemical diagnosis? Well, it relies again on the fact that it's based on measurements of both growth hormone in the circulation as well as IGF-1, and these are actually 24-hour circadian patterns of growth hormone in completely healthy subjects. In the fed state and in the fasting state, and in women as compared to men. And what we see is in the fed state that meal is associated with suppression of growth hormone levels. So this is the usual pattern, that we suppress our growth hormone levels in response to feeding, including exposure to glucose. By contrast, if we fast, the growth hormone levels increase in healthy subjects. And the same, of course, occurs in women. This is acromegalic patients. These are untreated or newly diagnosed patients, and the very important feature is, of course, that the basal levels are quite elevated, and also that we do not see this characteristic suppression of growth hormone in response to feeding or glucose. And this is something that we use when we make the diagnosis. One tricky feature is that, of course, growth hormone, by definition, growth hormone secretion is elevated in acromegaly. But if you look at the serum profile, this elevation can be quite subtle. This is two 24-hour profiles from a normal subject and an acromegalic subject. And in the normal subject, you see these basal, very, very low levels, and then occasional secretory bursts. What you see in the acromegalic patient is you don't have pulsatile secretion, and you have a relatively moderate elevation of growth hormone. Actually, this normal subject, if you calculate the average growth hormone secretion, the average of all these measurements is 1.4 microgram, and he has this IGF-1 level. And if you compare that to the patient, actually the average growth hormone level is exactly the same, but the pattern is completely different, and he has a much higher IGF-1 level. So these low levels are important, and they are not very prominently elevated, but they do differ markedly from the healthy subjects, where you can measure values that are very close to zero, and you don't see that in acromegalic patients. So that's another important feature. So you combine these pieces of information when you make the biochemical diagnosis, and this has been the subject of many consensus meetings and papers, and you can familiarize with these studies in the literature. This is one of the more recent papers. It's not the only one by far. And what they recommend is this: in patients with elevated or equivocal serum IGF-1 levels, we recommend confirmation of the diagnosis by finding lack of suppression of growth hormone to less than 1 microgram per liter following documented hypoglycemia during an oral glucose load. So we need to have a patient in whom we suspect acromegaly. We measure IGF-1, which by definition should be elevated, and we include also a growth hormone measurement, and what we focus on is the ability or lack of ability of glucose to adequately suppress serum growth hormone measurements. So I would like at the end to return to these patients with more subtle phenotypes, and this is one subject who actually volunteered to donate serum because we wanted to make a new reference values for our IGF-1 assay. So by definition, this subject was considered a healthy volunteer, but to our surprise, the IGF-1 level was markedly elevated, and we advised the patient also to, or the subject also to undergo a so-called growth hormone profile, including an oral glucose test. she failed to suppress below 1.6, I think, and the cutoff with our assay is 0.5 micrograms per liter, so this patient was actually diagnosed and subsequently treated for acromegaly. This is another example, this very nice young woman who presented with fertility problems, and she was diagnosed with a prolactinoma, and she has a very unremarkable phenotype in my opinion. She had this nice pituitary tumor that we'll discuss pituitary tumors in a short while. But she also had markedly elevated IGF-1 and also elevated growth hormone during suppression with glucose. And she was diagnosed with a tumor that secreted both prolactin and growth hormone. This is a young woman, again, without, in my opinion, a remarkable phenotype. She was presenting mainly with a headache, and for this reason she underwent imaging with a CT scan of the brain and also subsequently an MR scan, which revealed a pituitary tumor. This is the sagittal view, this is the posterior pituitary, this is the anterior, and this is a tumor mass. And actually this tumor grew quite aggressively in the core in a relatively short period. And when we investigated the patient, we actually could document that she did have acromegaly, but actually her acromegaly was a lesser part of this particular person's problem. Her main problem was an aggressively growing tumor. And this young lady who presented with the visual problems and underwent an MR scanning, and this is the tumor, which compresses the optic chiasm, and for this reason the patient had bitemporal hemianopsia, and for this reason she was operated, and after the operation her visual field was normalized, so that the operation was considered very successful, and she was offered to being tested actually for growth hormone deficiency, not growth hormone excess, but growth hormone deficiency with an insulin tolerance test. And when we did that, we saw this very peculiar pattern that she had markedly elevated growth hormone also before the insulin tolerance test. So actually we had to suspect acromegaly in this patient, and we did an oral glucose tolerance test to look for suppression of growth hormone, and as you can see we have very high growth hormone levels that suppress very little to the oral glucose load, and we have a very high IGF-1. So actually this patient to begin with had acromegaly, which we failed to diagnose in the first place. So symptoms, imaging and biochemistry are equally important in all patients, in my opinion. So to summarize, the diagnosis is usually straightforward and uncontroversial. What you could call subtle or whispering cases do indeed exist, and therefore, for this reason and other reasons too, we need rigorous biochemical criteria. And in that regard, elevated IGF-1 levels and inadequately suppressed GH during oral glucose tolerance testing are diagnostic. Thank you for your attention.